Well, I'm doing what a lot of other traders are doing. I'm going into the November time period with over 34 different positions on, many of them underwater. So naturally what I'm going to do now that the IRS and other regulators around the world are now looking at crypto in terms of tax compensation, very much like a security, I'm going to have to trade. So I'm going to be doing trading, taking some of the projects that have been decimated down 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90%, selling those and basically buying what I consider the granddaddy index of all crypto, Bitcoin. So I can go through the tax season owning more Bitcoin, I will, maybe a little bit more Ethereum, but basically the large market cap names are the ones that matter. So if you're going to do a basket of names to hold through the back end of the year, I would say it's going to be Bitcoin, Ethereum, Polygon, Solana.
Hello and welcome to our channel. In today's video, popular investor and Shark Tank star Kevin O'Leary gives an insight into his updated cryptocurrency portfolio, along with the key reasons why he's selling the majority of his underwater crypto allocations for Bitcoin. Kevin O'Leary also reveals the impact of the Fed printing $7 trillion on the U.S. economy and why Biden government is headed for a recession in the next 9 months. Make sure to stick around to the end of this video where Kevin O'Leary explains why European banks are zombie banks and completely uninvestable. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the post notifications. So, let's dive right into the video.
A highly unusual situation going on here, given how much the market is corrected, anticipating slowdown in earnings and a recession and a Fed gone wild with another 75 and potentially another 75 after that. None of these rate hikes have affected the consumer yet, and I speculate it's for one singular reason. No economy has ever printed $6.72 trillion in 30 months. That's basically turning on the printing presses, printing money, giving it away for free, dreaming up other reasons to give more money away for free, such as student loan forgiveness, and then the Anti-Inflation Act. That's just hilarious to call it that. It's very inflationary. And so at some point, we'll have to stop printing money, but it hasn't happened yet. All-time record deficit, consumers flush with cash, and these earnings are proving it out this week. If we're going to get a slowdown in earnings, it's probably going to be in Q1 or 2 next year because it doesn't look like it's going to make it this quarter. And as a result, we've got a really perplexing, difficult time for investors.
Kevin O'Leary, better known as Mr. Wonderful and host of the television show Shark Tank, anticipates that the price of Bitcoin will rise after the Stablecoin Transparency Act is passed into law, which he believes might happen soon after the midterm elections in November. O'Leary stressed that there is no way to stop the spread of cryptocurrency by saying you either join the wave or get lost.
It is a perplexing time, and you say, higher rates aren't affecting the consumer yet, but what about inflation fears? I mean, hotter numbers just keep rolling in here. When does that hit the system?
Well, the inflation fears come from the CPI number, which was over 8%, and that is inflationary. However, there's a new narrative going on in the market with investors regarding how the CPI is constructed. 40% is in shelter. And shelter stats are notoriously long dated. In other words, the numbers you're seeing now reflect the shelter market, the housing market, the apartment rental market 18 months ago when it was smoking hot. That is not the case in major cities now. Rent increases have slowed down, housing prices have softened as mortgages have increased, and yet it's not reflected yet. So it's a little bit of saying I want to change the data set now because I don't believe it anymore. That's kind of one narrative. But even though it's sitting at over 8%, the market is willing to fibrillate, waiting for more earnings validation that we actually have a slowdown. It's simply not there yet. And so if the Fed keeps using this 8% number and keeps ratcheting rates, they will overshoot.
Mr. Wonderful added that there's a piece of legislation known as the Stablecoin Transparency Act, which has the possibility of being approved by the U.S. Congress after the midterm elections that will take place on November 8th.
Well, Biden has to talk his book because he's only weeks away from a midterm where he's threatened right now to lose the House. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the Senate. What they wanted to have happen was that there's some indication of a slowdown in inflation. They didn't get that. And their gas prices in some states are on the rise. That's never, ever good for the incumbent, regardless of what party they're in. Inflation really kills you at midterms, and that's what they've got. So also, if the Fed raises another 75 basis points, before, which they will do before the midterms, that's not helpful either. So it's a really difficult act that he has to, higher wire act he's got to do. Biden's got to talk his book and try and keep as many of his candidates in the game as they can. When we talk about politics, abortion was the issue. and that seems to have been shifting now in the last few weeks to inflation and the cost of protein like chicken and food goods and gasoline back in the fray again. So, these things are binary. They're very difficult to call, but it does matter to you as an investor what happens in the midterms. There's no question about that.
He then went on to explain why the approval of this act will result in an increase in the price of Bitcoin. Even though it has nothing to do with Bitcoin, that will be the first regulation passed by U.S. regulators, and I would argue you want to be long Bitcoin going into that outcome, O'Leary emphasized. Even though it has nothing to do with Bitcoin, that will be the first regulation passed by U.S. regulators.
No, I don't think so. But I will say from an investment perspective, European banks are zombie banks. Their return on assets is abysmal. They never went through the cleansing that the giant crisis in the U.S. occurred in 2008, 2009, where we bailed out our banks, but we also put these really difficult covenants on them in the use of leverage and credit ratios and all the rest of it. So they ended up being much stronger when they were refounded. That's not the case. Bank of Scotland is still owned by the government, which is horrific. You never want a government running a bank. All the rest of the banks in Europe are uninvestable. They are absolute zombie banks, abysmal investments. I mean, avoid with extreme prejudice, absolute, make no money, terrible returns on assets, fat, really bad margins. Everything bad you could say about them, you can say about them, then you should double it. They are just zombies.
Stablecoins are going to see a lot of interest in institution capital pouring into them. He added, you're going to see a lot of interest in institutional capital going into.
Sure, I mean, there was a huge change in the direction of capital going into crypto in the last 6 months. So what's changed now is most of the investors that are willing to take the highly speculative investments, and some of them are large, a new deal called Mysten, M-Y-S-T-E-N, just got funded. Evan Chung was the name of the fellow who left Facebook. He was doing their digital currency. He took the whole team, set up a new company, raised $300 million in 45 minutes, basically without a deck. FTX was the lead investor at $100 million. I put money into that deal. He is promising a new blockchain to service financial transactions at 10 times the speed of anything else out there. And we do need that. So there's a lot of interest. But there's an example of a have company that really has no revenue. It's just starting its journey with now $300 million. It was almost 6x oversubscribed. The rest of the crypto market that came out of the DeFi space has been obliterated. And financings there are being done in crammed down rounds, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80% less than the last round. Very, very difficult. If the company's not profitable, there's not a lot of investor appetite for it. So you have the haves and the have-nots. In addition to that, the whole Web3 movement, which was what that whole conference was about, is more towards mass adoption. Everybody that's investing money into that is trying to solve for the wallet, number one. Number two, security. And number three, regulation. Those are the three horsemen of the new Web3 movement. Mass adoption through regulation, through security, and a much easier to use wallet. The best analogy I can give you, until your grandmother can figure out how to buy Bitcoin on her cell phone, we don't have a wallet that works yet. It has to pass the grandmother test.
Even though the measure doesn't specifically refer to Bitcoin, Kevin O'Leary thinks that the first stablecoin regulation established by U.S. regulators make for a compelling reason to be hopeful about Bitcoin. These restrictions were passed by the U.S. government.
I think it remains strong at times of uncertainty and war, and we've got two wars going on, the Ukrainian war and the war with China, the economic war, and the threats as we build up more tariffs. We stop selling them chips for AI. At some point, these two sides have to come to the table because there's too much to lose. But there's a war going on there too. That brings a lot of instability. It certainly crushed the values of Chinese stocks, which are starting to look very interesting. These are companies, in some cases, growing still at 30% that are trading at almost single-digit PEs. Not yet, but getting close. And so when you get an Alibaba whacked, a huge amount, or a Tencent, or any of these names, I always wait for the blood in the streets to buy those things in the first place, and they're starting to look pretty interesting.
So do you believe that the U.S. economy is headed for a recession? Tell us in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you soon in the next video, and thank you for watching.